So I think I have quite a bit to say about Invincible because I am not the biggest fan of comic books, nor am I a big fan of superheroes in general, and it's not to say that I don't really enjoy them or hate them or dislike them or anything like that. It's more so I've never had the opportunity to fall in love with them, to appreciate them for what they're worth. For the comic book situation, it's definitely more so being intimidated or overwhelming just because there's so many different series and points of contact that you can start within the comic book industry, some filled with legacies and histories and some iconic nature surrounding it. Honestly, there's just a scary variety of different alternatives and volumes and spin-offs and this and that for comic books in general, and it's probably a lot more simpler if you literally just Google it, and I'm sure there's a very easy system to kind of just fly on through the comic books that you want and how to find them, how to go about it. But I've never had the audacity or enough love for comic books to redirect it into reading them. So when it comes to Invincible, which obviously is a comic book, this show is an adaptation for it. If I liked the TV show, I'd read the comic book. And originally I was going to talk about the comic book, but I found myself enjoying the show a lot more than the comic book version, which I did actually go to read. And I read basically the same amount as what the show covers, and there's a drastically big difference between them. I'm not going to talk about the comic book, but the show itself does a lot of incredible things. And it fooled me, to put simply. Filled me with my interpretation of it prior to watching it, and even while watching it, it continuously tried to trick me, which I think is the utmost biggest appeal for Invincible, alongside its simplistic charm and over-the-top brutality and intensity. The gore that's meshed in between all of that surprisingly doesn't happen all too often as you would think, or at least expect, based off the first episode. It's more so used as shock value, and then it's trickled in very sparingly here and there until more so the finale of the season, where everything ramps up in intensity once again. So they use it intelligently and they don't oversaturate the show with that brutality or with that gore that definitely makes it stand out from other shows, from its competition, from its medium. That's not to say it's the first to do it, but it weaponizes it in a way that makes sense and isn't just thrown in there to make it over the top or sometimes even obnoxious for people. Hell, even the small amount they do use it may seem obnoxious for people, which perfectly up to each and everyone's own interpretation. There's some major things that I love how Invincible is handled. Its character dynamic, I think, is very interesting, balancing the superhero lifestyle with the coming of age story and the human lifestyle. The relationship dynamic, which is basically an umbrella term for family, friends, and romantic, even business. The growth of Mark Grayson, who is our main character, Invincible, the 17-year-old boy, learning about himself, his father, his mother, his friends, and basically trying to grow into this superhero that he feels is worthy and a good representative for the world. Trying to escape from his father's shadow, Omni-Man, who is known as the most powerful person on Earth, and to become his own significant and iconic figure. It's a very massive uphill battle, but it bleeds back into the dynamic of the characters. So his growth, his perception, his internalized feelings and the thoughts goes a very long way. Even though it's rather shallow in its reflection, how it's told or brought across throughout the story, there's a lot of beauty within it. And as much as they could have gone so much deeper into showing his struggles, into showing his mindset, the way he thinks about things, even his emotions, which they do probably pay the most attention to, his anger and how it switches on and off here and there, but not necessarily in the most obvious of ways. If there was more towards all of that, I feel like the story just would have been elevated to a whole different level. But they definitely made it work with what they had and within the time limit. It's only the first season. I can imagine a lot of the issues, quote unquote, or complaints that I have will easily be fixed in the second season with a bigger budget and knowing the reception of the first season's success. So that's always something to look forward to. But the third and final thing that made this series not necessarily perfect, but the most engaging it could be, is its deception. It will constantly fool you and misdirect you in so many different ways where you kind of forget what you were trying to pay attention to begin with. I did not know what to expect from Nolan or Omni-Man. When you have someone that is basically the equivalent of Superman, and no one even comes close to him in terms of power or speed or anything along those lines. Being a Viltrumite, coming from a whole completely different race of people and a planet far off within the space, when you have him completely deceive your understanding of the story, the amount of ideas that run through your head is the most natural conceptualized thing from this entire season. Because by the end of episode 1, the amount of mental gymnastics you're trying to do to either justify, question, or figure out what Omni-Man is actually doing is rather impressive. And the fact that it is so natural and reoccurring and something that is consistent throughout the entirety of this season, with so many different curveballs and things that play upon it, the amount of deception and misdirection that is used for the show becomes its primary appeal. What is Omni-Man? Why did he do these things? Was he being controlled? Is he super evil? Is there a big brain villain at play? What are these blue guys doing? What is Robot doing? What is Cecil doing? There's so many different people or things or issues that are drip fed throughout the entirety of the season to make you think that Nolan isn't the type of person that you originally saw him as. And the reason I say it like this is because as much as you witness him doing all of these things in the first episode at the end of it, which is very climatic and is a perfect way to shock the audience into showing you that this story is not as simplistic as you thought it was. It has this brutal undertone that will be used when it is needed. You have that shock, and then immediately after, almost for the rest of the entire season, every time you see Nolan, he is a good individual. He is a good person, a loving and caring father and husband. You're kind of torn on what to actually believe. If anything, your main focus goes to Robot or to someone else entirely if he is being brainwashed, because even the story itself pushes that idea as someone has taken control of Omni-Man. Someone has brainwashed him to do these horrific things. And when it runs out of things to deceive you with, Invincible fools you once again. It starts to slowly add the true personality of Omni-Man, the true personality of a Viltrumite, of Nolan, what his emotions are, what his mindset is, his beliefs, his ideologies. And prior to this, you wouldn't necessarily expect it. Maybe you just thought he was kind of wired a different way, but nothing that was too obnoxious at the time. Maybe he was just a little bit hard on his son, or the way he even perceived his son was a little bit different. He had a lot of high hopes or standards for him because he was coming of age, gaining these very powerful abilities that the Viltrumite uphold. His son was basically becoming him. But then you see the slices of his true personality and you start to paint the bigger picture. Bit by bit, you get rid of all of these extra misinterpretations, redirections that the story has tried to make you latch onto, and as you loosen them off one by one, you start to see that the problem itself isn't actually another being or someone controlling Omni-Man or Nolan. It's Nolan himself. And then the story goes to capitalize on that, almost like it knows people would figure out by this point that something is wrong. And the best way that this is done is by the most arguably insignificant character in terms of power or dynamic throughout the entirety of the story. And I don't say insignificant in a disrespectful way, but more so you don't expect it. It's Debbie, which is Mark's mother or Nolan's wife. But Debbie is used as the perfect character to supply this curiosity. While Mark is growing in his own direction, coming to understand his powers as we're following his perspective, Nolan's within the background being a creep. We don't know what he's doing. He's a bit weird. He's done these horrendous things, yet, something might have controlled him, or another supervillain is at play. It's nothing out of the ordinary necessarily. But Debbie is different. She doesn't fall in line with Nolan's ideals. She slowly starts to become suspicious, and she provides that curiosity for viewers in such a perfect amount, where you have this love and respect for her. Even though she's not used all too much throughout the story, she plays honestly the heart of it all. Because of how important deceiving the audience is, supplying that curiosity and bringing it back all full circle is only possible because of her, because she goes against the person that she's fallen in love with. And even then, this creates this super agonizing and scary situation when you start to figure out that this is actually Nolan. This is his mindset, his emotions. You're worried for Debbie. You're worried that because you haven't seen much brutality in a while, and you know what's in the show, at any moment Nolan could fly back home and completely obliterate his wife, Mark's mother, within an instant. And there's moments where it plays with that anxiety so goddamn well. Nolan punches touching the wall and flying through the roof is just the start of building that anxiety. But it's so profound, it works so well. If you haven't already noticed, the way they've used Omni-Man and Deception and Debbie and even Mark and our focus and attention on him is my most favorite thing. It's the biggest appeal. Don't get me wrong, I actually enjoy the journey that Mark Grayson goes to. Even though I find his character pretty simple and honestly rather boring at times, I do really appreciate the attention that they gave with Amber, because I've seen so many people talk about the Amber and Mark situation, and I was curious on what that whole thing was indicative to. Like, why are people so upset or so talkative about this relationship? I understand why now. I am very grateful that this relationship between Mark and Amber is within this story, because regardless if you hate Amber or not, this is the perfect interpretation of Mark coming to understand himself, his relationships, his emotions, but also balancing the superhero lifestyle with his personal lifestyle. It's a conflict of interest, and he battles his conflict of interest so often that he repeats it over and over again, to the point where Amber not only figures out that he is invincible and doesn't really say anything, but also tries to push his hand into either being here on time or either telling her that he is invincible. There quite easily could have been a whole lot more done with Mark, with Amber, and their conflict. But I do think the little time we have for the show, it works the way it's intended to. It works well. It shows Mark a very brutal reality that normal human relationships are going to be very difficult if he's not ready for it. And at that point, he wasn't ready for it. He may never be ready for it, which is why they implement Eve as a character. Now, I haven't read the comic book, but I put like 80 to 90% of my confidence into the idea that Mark ends up with Eve at the end. I'm almost tempted to Google it and spoil myself to see if that is true, because the way they bring her into the story, the way she contrasts with Amber and Mark and plays like this weirdly offset individual, which seems would be the perfect match for Mark, but never gets the chance to make her move because of Amber, seems right up the alley of being that love interest that doesn't necessarily come true till a certain point. Then once it does, they have their ups and downs, and eventually they are endgame. Obviously, both being superheroes, so both going through those trials and tribulations of it, but you know what I mean. Even Mark, endgame, 100%. Two things to end it off. Absolutely love the showcase of William. Even though he's not used all too much, the comedy or humor that he brings is really refreshing. He also makes a lot of characters orbit around him and brings them together, which leads to a very interesting clash of personalities, and he just stands out. He's just a lovable person, and I feel like is honestly really refreshing once again throughout the entire story, to take a breather from the action or the superhero or even the brutality, the intensity of Deception with Nolan and Debbie, the adventures of Mark and coming to understand himself. So when you see William to break it up just a little bit, it's really nice. And last thing, the final episodes, the final fight, if you will. This is the best example on why they didn't consistently use the brutality or the gore or the intensity of it throughout the entirety of the show. If they trickle that in bit by bit, they started off with the first episode, they show you the shock value, and then honestly completely forget about it and get rid of it for like 4 to 5 episodes, only for it to come back right at the end and to show it in the most visceral, gruesome, horrific type of way that you can imagine. Not only brings back that shock value, almost like you're first-handly experiencing it once again, but there's like this added benefit for it because it's from the same character. The scenes are horrid in depiction and honestly traumatizing for Mark. Seeing what he goes through, the lengths he goes to try to understand what his father is going through. This is a battle of father and son, and while I think there could have been a lot more done with it in terms of emotions, I loved the nuanced version they went with. When I say emotion, I don't necessarily mean anger, but more so the perception of understanding each other. Mark tried to give his father excuses on why he was doing these things, and then he slowly started to see the bigger picture. But even on death's door, even when his father was spouting all of these things about Viltrumites and what he truly is, where he comes from, what he's meant to do, the anger that he has inside, the conqueror's semi-god complex that he has, his son still believes in him. Mark still believes in him. Once again, it's very nuanced. If there was a little bit more build up for this, maybe even just playing on their relationship or playing on the complexity of Nolan's emotions just a fraction action more, this whole fight would have been elevated to such a height that would have been super impressive. But honestly, I can't complain because it still almost actually manages to reach that height at the end. When he's flying away, you see him crying, tears within his eyes. That's the complexity that I'm looking for. That's what I wholeheartedly loved about that final scene. That through all this deception, all this suspicion and curiosity of what or who Nolan truly is, his mindset has changed while he's been on Earth. His Viltrumite emotions and mindset is clashing with his human emotions and mindset. I would have loved to seen that pulled apart just a little bit more. And while they scratch the surface of it with Nolan bringing up Debbie and how he thinks of her as just a pet, there's so much meaning behind his words that are never fully unearthed, which isn't a bad thing. Still gives you pretty much the exact same experience, but knowing that there could have been more there to elevate it even further had me wishing for that tiny bit more. I'm happy with it. Everything that Invincible done is an enjoyable experience, and this is coming from someone that doesn't enjoy comic books or stuff about superheroes in general. So if you're in a similar situation to myself, give it a chance. A lot of people will thoroughly enjoy it, and I'm quite looking forward to season 2 and 3 and whatever else comes after it, respectfully. Hell, I might even check out the comic books. So with that being said, that is basically it. Let me know your thoughts on Invincible. Who's your favorite character? What's your favorite moment? And were you surprised with the Nolan or Omni-Man situation? The whole reveal surrounding his character. There is a lot of great things, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Drink plenty of water. New video every 3 days, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.